looks like we're just waiting to go on Facebook. So we'll get started in just a minute then. Okay, perfect. I just got the notification that we're live on Facebook. So we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining us for our weekly tour of the collection. My name is Allison and I'm part of the education department at the Timken, and always happy to welcome you to our virtual tours, while the museum is closed. So today we are doing kind of an overview of the collection, but we're really focusing on the idea of looking and connecting with art, how we as individuals can connect with the art that we see in our collection. Before we get to the tour, I just want to go over a couple of kind of housekeeping guidelines. If you're in our Zoom room, we do ask that you keep yourself muted for the duration of the tour. There'll be some opportunities for questions throughout the tour, and our docents will kind of walk you through that. And so you can be ready to unmute yourself, but while they're presenting, we just ask that you keep your microphone off. You can always add anything to the chat though, any questions and comments that you have throughout the tour. Like I said, there will be some times for questions during the tour, but if you think of something right away and you're like, oh, I'm gonna forget it, go ahead and put it in the chat and we'll take care of it when we get to those times. If you're on Facebook also, you can join our conversation by putting your questions and comments in the comment section below the video on Facebook, and we're monitoring that, and so we'll include you in the conversation too. So with that, I'd like to pass it over to our docents, Barbara Morgan and Jerry Veal, and they will take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. And I apologize for the clock chiming in the background, but maybe it'll be a little ambiance here. It'll be finished momentarily. My cohort, Jerry Veal, and I are just so happy to have you join us this morning. And we have thought of a new way to maybe help us connect with art this morning. Ergo, our title, Looking and Connecting with Art. I'll move the slide now. Hopefully, I don't know why it's not moving. Allison?
You try clicking on the, and then go down to the lower left.
Down here?
Yeah, there you go.
Usually I use my, oh, thank you.
There we go.
All right. In the bottom right, we have these words that help us look and connect. That art helps us open a window to enhance thoughts and ideas as we look and connect with the following paintings. With this thought, I'm going to now turn it over to Jerry, who will begin our exploration of looking and connecting. And before I do that, I would like to bounce off of what Allison said at the beginning, that we're going to have an opportunity before the end to have any comments or questions you might have. So we're going to have two paintings, one from Jerry and then one from myself. And after that, before we complete a final three paintings, we will have a little bit of time in there so we don't have to hold everything until the end. Now with that, Jerry, if you could continue for us.
Happy to, Barbara, thank you. Hello, everybody. I am Jerry Veal, and we are beginning this week's connection with art with a trip to the 16th century. At the beginning of the 16th century, there was an eruption of Protestant fervor in Northern Europe and the Netherlands, and a belief that the relationship with God was between the individual and God and did not need intercession by a formal church between the two. That led to also the belief that art was not necessary. It was a conversation between God and the person alone. Martin Luther made this even easier when he published the first publication of a Bible in the citizens' vernacular in Germany at the time. Thus began the Reformation, during which a religious art and the visual art in a religious theme was tantamount to idolatry and very, very discouraged, and in many cases destroyed. To defend against this rebellion, the Catholic Church decided to take an active role and started funding and commissioning greater art and greater architectural buildings. A good example of this is our next picture, Madonna and Child with Saint Elizabeth, the infant Saint John the Baptist, and Saint Catherine of Alexandria. This is a perfect example of Counter-Reformation art, where the Catholic Church is trying to reconnect with the public and bring that public back to the church, or perhaps reinvigorate their faith with the Catholic religion, providing beautiful pictures that are warm and colorful and inviting, that encourage them to remain. This is similar to what the Timken Museum is doing today with Zoom meetings, trying to reconnect with the public and bring you back to an appreciation of the pictures that we have. This picture, again, the Madonna and Child with Saint Elizabeth, the infant Saint John the Baptist, and Saint Catherine, was done by Paolo Cagliari, also known as Paolo Veronese. He was born in Verona and thus became known for his city, Paolo Veronese. In this picture, the Veronese projects 5 connected figures in front of a wall opening to a garden on the left. If you enter the picture on the left, the first individual that you see is Saint Elizabeth. Saint Elizabeth, if you look at her closely, has a very lined, tired, and severe, almost severe looking face. Now, this is for a multiple of reasons. One could be that she became a mother very late in life, supposedly around 65 or 69. That would be enough to make anyone severe. But it also shows that she perhaps has some inkling of the trials and tribulations coming for her child and his cousin Jesus. Her beautiful red robe flows across her lap and down to the floor underneath the foot of the baby Saint John. Now, we know this is Saint John the Baptist because he's clothed in an animal skin. That is Saint John's attribute, which identifies him. Saint John is standing a little bit on Mary's foot, but reaching up to the baby Jesus, while Mary, clothed in this iridescent cloth, white robe, pink top garment, and blue skirt with a very slight halo around her head, looks down. She's looking down at him with great motherly concern, but also a very serious look. She's obviously also concerned about the future for Saint John, her baby's cousin, and her baby Jesus. Now, Jesus in her lap very actively reaches out to Saint Catherine of Alexandria. This creates what is known as a sacred conversation. This is when Jesus has an active conversation with someone that isn't alive at this time. Saint Catherine was born in the very late 200s, early 300s. So she's not yet alive, but here they're having this sacred conversation. Saint Elizabeth is clothed in this iridescent blue gold robe with a striped dress underneath. These are very wealthy clothes. Having a cloth that is multicolored like that only happened with the very wealthiest of families. And her hair is decorated with strings of pearls. This shows that she's from a very, very wealthy family. This is a woman that was a very studious young woman who converted to Christianity early. And because she was well known, apparently the daughter of a politician at the time, the emperor of the area was very interested in St. Catherine, and he was offended that she converted to Christianity. He wanted her to convert back to what he considered was the appropriate religion, paganism, and she refused. So he threw her in the dungeon and had her scourged. He even sent scholars to debate with her, but she was such an erudite young woman that she, in fact, converted the scholars, which undoubtedly enraged the emperor even more. However, it also fascinated him, and he had her brought out of prison and proposed to her marriage to her. She rejected him, saying that she was already married to Jesus in her heart and she could not marry anyone else. Undoubtedly, that enraged him. He ordered her put to death on a spiked wheel. Amazingly, when she touched that wheel, the wheel crumbled, refusing to subject her to any pain. The emperor kept going and required that she be beheaded. So she was unfortunately successfully killed. But you can see in this picture, her left knee is almost resting on a wheel. And that is St. Catherine's attribute. Whenever you see a woman richly dressed with a wheel, that is St. Catherine of Alexandria. You will notice in her right hand at the top right side of this picture, she has a palm frond, which is an indication of martyrdom. So we know this is St. Catherine. This is an amazing picture done for Counter-Reformation purposes, basically reminding the faithful that art is a tool to help them meditate on the meaningful scriptures that happened in Jesus's life, and to provide saintly images that could perhaps intercede with them and help them along if they felt they didn't know how to talk to God. This is a warm, colorful, beautiful picture that really encourages someone to come back and think about the people that inhabit the Bible and how they can interact with your own life. And now Barbara is going to show us how a slightly different type of picture encourages this relationship.
Thank you, Jerry. Jerry mentioned the Reformation, and the Reformation occurred in, I believe, 1517. So gradually, as Jerry mentioned, the Catholic Church was concerned about the split in religion. And so they commissioned, as Jerry said, a lot of religious paintings. And this comes under the realm of the Counter-Reformation that she already mentioned. And that Counter-Reformation occurred, you know, as a result of the Reformation. The art depicted here is Baroque art, and the Baroque is art that really began more in the 1600s and lasted to about the middle of the 1700s, so the 17th into the 18th centuries. And this famous painting that we have in our Timken Museum of Art is done by a French painter, Francisco de Zurbarán. And Zurbarán was one of the most famous painters in Spain at that time and has since also been recognized similarly. As a young man, he was very early recognized for his talent. And although he came from a pretty impoverished family, they sent him to an art school where he had the opportunity to learn about a Michelangelo Caravaggio. Now, this Michelangelo is not the Michelangelo who painted the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, but also an Italian painter by the same first name, but known more or less by Caravaggio. In fact, when he finished the school, about, you can see he painted this about 1635. A few years before this, he started his own studio. He was finished with his schooling. And one of the commissions he received at that time was from the King of Spain. The king was Philip IV. He was also King of Portugal simultaneously for some of the years. And he commissioned Zurbarán to do paintings for him. And a story, or some people feel a myth, exudes as a result of that time period, in which the king was supposed to have put his hand on Zurbarán's shoulder and said, "You are painter to the king, but you are the king of painters." And that particular quote stands out and has lasted for years because he is one of the great painters of that time. Now, he did, as I mentioned, he was commissioned by the king, but he was very more so commissioned by religious orders. And this would be the Franciscan orders and other orders of priests and nuns who commissioned him to help them with their devotion. And of course, a very popular saint to always be wanted to be painted was Saint Francis. Saint Francis,
Stay muted.
painted by Zurbarán, was painted 34 times by Zurbarán. And we are very lucky here in San Diego that the Timken does possess one of these paintings. Now, as we look at this one entitled Saint Francis in Meditation, Saint Francis lived from the late 1100s to into the 1200s. And yet these years later, when this was painted up through, of course, our era today, he is very admired and very respected in not religions, but in many of our cultures. Saint Francis is known for three reasons in his work. He is known as the founder of the mendicant order, and a mendicant order is an order that is concerned for the poor. And he especially is noted for that because he grew up in a very wealthy family. And then through his own observations and contemplations, he realized that it should not just remain with the wealthy, but we need to share with the poor. And of course, to this day, that social justice issue remains. He is also known to be a contemplative and lastly, a poet. Now, I am going to concentrate on all of this as we look at this painting. This particular painting of Saint Francis in Meditation obviously shows Saint Francis as a contemplative, but it also shows the elements of the Baroque period. And these elements are dark colors. It's very heavy. It is very serious paintings because the Counter-Reformation was in this era, and the Catholic Church and eventually other churches were trying to say, we need devotion to these saints. So he is depicted here with this dark color, a lot of the dark color here on the left as we go down. And then a light is very much shining on his face. And it's intentionally done by Zurbarán that the eyes of Saint Francis here are not looking elsewhere in the painting. His eyes are not looking at us, but his eyes are looking down at a skull. And researchers have shared with all of us that that's intentionally done to depict the fact that Saint Francis was a contemplative. He was a mystic, and he was contemplating the demise not only of himself, but of all of us. And his contemplation did not just stay there. It resulted in work he did through social justice issues and helping the poor. So we have the light and the dark. We have him clothed in the garb of the religious order of the Franciscans. And it very much is similar today if you've ever been to a Franciscan mission, for example. I know in Oceanside, the Franciscan mission there, you see the monks and the priests often wearing their robe, but you never really see their hood up. And this was done intentionally by him to show, you know, I'm not just earthly, I'm thinking of where I will lead. And that's the fact. Sorry, I went back here. Allison, oh, here we go. All right, I had the, I apologize. So Saint Francis, his contemplation, as I was saying, and in summary here, was not just in isolation, but it was in a cloister. It was contemplation that led to his social justice work. And that is the same perspective, as I was saying, that the Franciscan orders all over the world exude today. They have time for prayer and meditation and the contemplative side of their lives, but it's not just staying there. Their works go beyond their confines to help others find God, but do good works in their life. And that's why we say that St. Francis has this perspective of social justice, of caring for the poor. And it is probably that reason that he is so admired today, not by just Christian religions, but other religions as well, and also cultures that are not necessarily religious. Now, I did say at the onset that he was known for his starting of the mendicant orders, orders that care about the poor. He was a contemplative that that contemplation resulted in St. Francis and his followers to use that contemplation to better themselves so they could go out and help others better themselves. But he is also known as a poet. Now, his words that are written down in writings that he did when he lived were paraphrased about 100 years ago. And I am going to end this particular section with reading just a few of them that I think all of us will recognize. St. Francis said, "Make me an instrument of peace, that I might not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, for it is in giving that we receive." So with that, I would like to go to this quote. Jerry spoke about the Veronese painting, and I mentioned the Zurbarán one. Religious paintings, as it says here at the beginning here, glorify, they suggest, and they tell us story to really help us look and connect. Now, we are going to stop here momentarily and see if any of you can add comments or perhaps have questions. And I don't know if there's anything in the chat room, Allison. So, Allison, maybe I could turn it over to you now for a few minutes.
Yeah, so there's nothing in the chat, but I see that Jane has her hand up. So Jane, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to the Zurbarán painting for a minute and ask you about his eyes, because
Yes.
because as I was just looking at it with my magnifying glass, it looks to me like his eyes are not looking down at the skull, but they're looking off to the side of the painting, almost out of the frame and maybe into the world, as a way of contemplating what might be his focus, not so much on death or on heaven as the raised hood would suggest, but out in the world helping others.
And you know, Jane, I think that goes along with what I was saying, that he was a contemplative, and I know some historians believe he is looking down at the skull. But as you mentioned that, you can see that although his eyes seem closed or certainly at half mast, they could be looking off to the side. And that would be a one thought, because what does contemplation, or what should it do? Not that it should merely bring us into ourselves, but we contemplate or we reflect or we meditate or whatever we want to call it, walk in nature, so that we're better prepared to live in this world and to be people who grow and make it a better place, so that someday when we leave, it's a bit better because of what we precipitated, perhaps.
So that contemplation leads to action.
That's correct. That's beautifully put. That's it. Thank you. I love your addition.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. Anyone else? I don't see anything in the chat, but you're free to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask a question at this time. And like I said, I'm looking on Facebook too, if anyone there wants to ask a question in the comments.
Perhaps we could go to that next slide, Allison.
Oh.
There you go. Thank you.
I'm sort of curious, I guess maybe if I can ask a question, because you were talking about, so much about the Counter-Reformation, that where would people have seen these paintings? I think the St. Francis one, did you say that one would have been in a monastery? Is that right? It was created for
Well, yes, because so many of his works that I found in my research, the majority of them were commissioned by the religious orders. And, I know that obviously it had a journey to the Timken, and I would have to go back in my research to give all the steps of how in that era it went from a monastery all the way to the Timken. Jane, I don't know, do you know anything about that history as to what the steps are between the monastery and the Timken acquiring it?
You're talking about the provenance? I don't.
No. Perhaps, Allison, did you mean how would the normal everyday person have seen these works if the Counter-Reformation was aimed toward the general public? To me, obviously they would have been in churches, but there could have been some in frescoes on outdoor walls, and undoubtedly they were in the homes of the wealthy. So servants and guests would have seen them. In fact, I would be willing to bet that many of the wealthy thought they were doing a great thing and maybe perhaps even currying favor to have some of these larger, beautiful paintings in their homes and in their gardens so that people would know of their devotion to Christianity and kind of expand to others through that means.
Mm-hmm. And Jerry, around this time, the 1600s is exactly when that started, not just commissioning religious paintings, but we know from the Timken's collection that one of the first commissioned paintings that we currently own is the one of the portrait of the lady in the green dress, which is almost around that exact same time.
That's true.
That the Franciscan meditation was done. So both were starting to show us that it was private, wealthy people who were commissioning artists and not just church organizations or kings.
And maybe also, like Jerry said, a good way to kind of show what side you're on also, by
Exactly, very much so. A little bit like advertising today.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as we have learned, paintings speak to our minds and to our hearts. But so can non-religious paintings. And as we move forward, we're going to look at a painting from the 17th century now. These changes in religious activity have translated to a strong interest in things other than religious art, particularly in the northern climes. And the northern artists that have started an interest in everyday genre paintings and landscape paintings have, of course, traveled through the rest of Europe and spread their interest to Spain and into Italy and other countries. One of the most famous French painters actually lived in Rome, and that was Nicolas Poussin. And he spent although he was French, he spent most of his time in Rome. And his Baroque style and Mannerist style that came from prior times was greatly modified by the classical statues and the classical paintings in Rome. So he moved into this classical style of actually landscape painting. And one of his students and one of his most ardent admirers was Claude Lorraine. And you are looking right now at a painting by Claude Lorraine, who began life as Claude Gelée, but became Claude Lorraine because of the fact that he was born in the Duchy of Lorraine. Claude Lorraine greatly gentled and did a more sophisticated revelation of landscaping and became almost as famous as Nicolas Poussin rivaled him in fame at the time. Claude Lorrain also moved to Rome as a young boy. He started out as a pastry chef, working for a landscape painter, learned the technique of landscape painting, and absolutely fell in love with landscape painting. His idea of painting was all about the beauty of a broad sky infused with this golden light of either sunrise or sunset, made hazy through clouds, looking at a rippling water, and made mountains in the background. And he concentrated on just landscapes and refining his vision of landscape painting. As you can see here, he did a classical style. The painting is framed on either side by leafy green vegetation. Water leads the eye to the middle and the back of the painting to this beautiful misty castle with hazy mountains in the distance, beautiful clouds, and this crystal blue sky anchoring the top of the painting. Now, most landscape painters at the time, of course, they all worked in their studies. They didn't walk around like we do today, taking a picture or a selfie with our cameras of an instant picture of what was happening. They didn't have that luxury. Most of them would make a few sketches, go back to their studios, and then compose something in their minds and put it together. Claude Lorrain was a fanatic. He spent hours and hours outside, wandering the countryside around Rome, laying on the ground to get different perspectives, but also spending from early morning till dark at night to watch the light change and see how the quality of the light changed. He developed a technique of minute little color changes, very, very minute, to show these gradations in the light that indicated sunrise or sunset. He didn't paint at noon like some painters because he felt that color, that bright color, washed out the picture. He wanted the subtleties of the landscape and the distance to show through the haze of sunrise or sunset. Now, this particular picture, if you look at the foreground, his individuals are relatively minor, but they're showing some travel across the picture. You start on the front left and you see a man, probably a shepherd, sitting on a rock, having his foot tended to. You can see in the little blowout there, by another woman with perhaps a basket of washing while a standing woman watches. Then as your eye travels across the painting to the right, you see another woman, probably a washerwoman, taking a basket of clothing across the river and following a cowherd with his beasts as they cross the river. He's got cows and goats and a dog there appropriately. And to me, they're going across the river to what I believe might be a path that actually goes back across the painting and leads you to go across that lower mountain in the forefront, which has a ruin at the top of it, and leads your eye back across to the larger portion of the river, might be a lake or just the larger portion of the river going in front of the castle on that far mountain, back into the distant mountains glowing through the haze. This is really a classic Claude Lorrain picture. Beautiful, delicate landscape with a delicate haze of light flowing up into that brilliant cerulean blue sky. He really infused nature with human feeling and timeless appeal. The 17th century, of course, was not this pretty. It was a very difficult and dangerous life in the 17th century. But many people believe that Claude Lorrain created these lyrical examples of what life could be if everything were perfect. And that's why they were so popular. People lived their life every day, but somewhere, somehow, there must be this perfect, beautiful pastoral life that if they kept working toward, it would appear to them. So this is a real reassurance of stability and an atmosphere of bucolic happiness that Claude Lorraine and his compatriots of the time made so popular in this period of history. Now, Claude Lorraine was a very dedicated man. He never married. He was apparently very amiable, very dedicated, very particular, and very shrewd. He made a book that he called Liber Veritatis, or Book of Truth, in which he provided sketches of all of his paintings so that they could not be imitated or have forgeries made. This particular painting belonging to the Timken is listed as number 103 in that book, and it's annotated as having been done for a patron in Avignon, France, and that it was meant for a papal ownership. So he was a very, very smart man, and the Timken is very fortunate to have this outstanding example of 17th century landscape painting. And Barbara is going to tell us about another Frenchman that has really different painting that changed the world of art.
My painter is Jean-Honoré Fragonard, and he is about 130 years after the painter that we just heard about from Jerry. Fragonard was actually a student of Boucher. Now I'm going to take my pointer and we are going to look into the gallery as it was at the Timken Museum. And here's the famous painting by Boucher. And then the one I am talking about now, Fragonard's Blind Man's Bluff, is a very small painting. So I wanted you to get that perspective as we look at it here. Now, first, Fragonard, who I said was a student of Boucher. So they come under the realm of the Rococo period, and the Rococo period was very different from the periods we've spoken of or you're aware of. Certainly we had the Baroque period that came in as a result of the, along with the Counter-Reformation that went into a neoclassical period. And the French didn't want any of that. It was almost non-religious. They started painting very differently. And the Rococo period is a period of elaborate ornamentation, lighter colors, lines that are not as defined. So it's a wispiness almost, and a playfulness type of painting, of which Fragonard is certainly depicting here. Now, I already mentioned that he came under the tutelage of Boucher, who is also a famous painter, as I mentioned. But along with studying fellow French painters, he decided to go to Rome, Italy, leave France. And when he was there, he was exposed to other avenues that he had not witnessed when he was living in France. So he was exposed to, in Rome, the gardens, the temples, the grottos, the terraces, and the fountains. And we can then see in this painting and others that he had also painted that that realm also is coming out in his Rococo French style. He painted this Blind Man's Buff, and Blind Man's Buff is one of 5 paintings that he painted over a course of 30 years with that exact same title. But each one has a bit of a different perspective. Now, the painting that we own here at the Timken Museum of Art has a subtitle, and it's Blind Man's Buff with a pink parasol, and you can see the pink parasol. So as I speak of this painting, I am going to emphasize that. But I want to just for a moment go back to the 5 paintings that I mentioned. 5 paintings, but 2 of them are very heavy on the theme of love, and the theme of love, or the blindness of love. And we have hints of that in this painting. But our Timken Blind Man's Bluff comes under the realm, along with 2 others that he painted, which emphasize generalized pleasures of sociability and the play outdoors. But because they all have the Blind Man's Bluff title, we also have that in this one. But this painting, as I said, along with 2 of the others in the collection of the 5, also emphasize the garden and the fountain and other avenues that he experienced when in Rome. Now, I would like to specifically talk about the gentleman sitting here under this pink parasol. So he is sitting here with a blindfold around him. And the blindfold is one in which he is attempting to pull it down. And as he does that, this younger woman here is holding his arm so that he doesn't pull that down. So what Frogana is really trying to say to us here is that this gentleman has an interest in what is happening externally. And as you can see, he is pointed in the direction to his right, as are all of the other characters mentioned here. What this says to us is this small painting at one time had another section to it, and that is lost. But the researchers have been able to prove that there was another element to this painting originally. So the theme doesn't change. The theme is he has an external yearning to see what is going on outside of him, as are the other characters sitting around him. But he also can't do that. So he has to imagine, he has to visualize, he has to live in a world that is, maybe going back to what I said earlier, more meditative, more contemplative. And researchers have said that they believe that Frogana was showing us both elements in this particular painting of Blind Man's Buff, because of what this young man is trying to do in this game of Blind Man's Buff, of really trying to see what is going on externally. So it places an emphasis here on the pink parasol that he's under. He tries to lift the edge of his blindfold with his hand, as I said, and the companion is trying to take his arm so he does not do that. As I already mentioned, what this does then, it sets up a contrast really between what he and we see outside and what he is attempting to see. So there is this juxtapositioning of intrinsic and extrinsic thinking. Now, this is a Rococo painting. And so the Rococo painting here is one in which sight is limited by this gentleman here, but the unclarity of it is shown here with the colors, with the whimsical lines. And we go here to loose brush strokes, the colors that are diminished. There is a sculpture behind him that is gray, highlighted in a white color. We see clouds beginning to come into the scene. So that is bespeaking the fact that maybe it is getting to be a time in the day when a storm is beginning to occur. But they're oblivious to that. They're looking to their right to see what is going on. In this painting, the artist uses diffuse color and diffuse light, but he uses small objects and people, but they're not real clear, which is very much part of that Rococo. It almost reminds me of the beginning of the period of art that we had that had more illusions that followed this. Now, this painting has this part of it which I have not spoken of yet, and it is the tree. And this tree highlights what is occurring beneath them. In the summer of 2019, the Timken Museum of Art continued its quest for highlighting other paintings that or sculptures that would be done by local artists in juxtapositioning to what we own at the Timken. And as I pointed out, the little painting here is the one I've just been talking about. I am sure many of you saw this in the foyer of the Timken Museum, where we have the gentleman called Roman de Salvo, and he is a local San Diego artist, primarily a sculptor, and he was invited by the Timken to choose a painting, and he was drawn to this one, and obviously, specifically the tree. So he recreated this in an erector set-like way, and he branches out, raising it up like the tree in the painting to two main branches and others exuding from it. He replicated the people sitting around it in a way where we could sit around it. And I remember going on my own one day and sitting there just quietly. And I didn't at the time know too much about the painting here, but it inspired me to learn more because of De Salvo's work. And we were lucky enough as docents and others to hear De Salvo speak to us. And he talked about his interest in that tree and what he did, but he juxtapositioned within his own sculpture the fact that we could sit quietly and contemplate what he had done. So I believe that this then really shows what we were trying to say in our theme here. That our theme, here, let me go. Before I go to that, our theme of looking, seeing, and then looking and connecting. And I do think that he helped us do that. Now, I gave you a little hint by accidentally switching to the next painting. And it's one that is going to be an American painting. And we have been concentrating on landscaping. And landscaping is something that American painters who were very much into the realistic mode love to paint. They painted a lot of persons, places, and things. And Jerry is going to tell us how in the next painting, it was a place, but it was primarily a thing and the realism of that thing that she will now talk about.
Thank you, Barbara. Thanks for showing us the connection between the century in which Fragonard lived and the current century with the painting from the sculpture from De Salvo. Sorry, my computer's doing a few weird things. I see we're running out of time, so I'm going to have to shorthand this a bit. But this painting is by Martin Johnson Heade, who was an American landscape painter in the very early 20th, late 19th century. Mr. Heade was almost unknown during his lifetime. He started out by doing landscapes of the New England coast, the New England salt marshes, and became known as a luminist for his treatment of light during that time. He also went to South America after exposure to one of his friends, Frederick Church's monumental Andes painting, he became fascinated by South America and is also known for some wonderful hummingbird and tropical flower pictures. But late in life, he married. When he was about 65, he moved to St. Augustine, Florida, where he found a new patron who had constructed the new fabulous Ponce de Leon Hotel. And in that hotel was a studio for Mr. Heed and some fellow painters. And Mr. Heed began to concentrate on southern flowers, in particular, the southern magnolia. Now, the southern magnolia had become known as the American tree because it was so beautiful and yet sturdy, and had actually been imported to Europe in the 1700s. The southern magnolia, as you may know, of which this is a picture of one of the blossoms, has these gorgeous, large, luxurious white blossoms, but they last a very short period of time. And at this point in time, when he painted this painting, which was done in 1888, he was almost 69. So he's at the toward the end of his life. He's at the height of his skills, and yet he is still trying to develop the perfect expertise in how to show a bloom of this quality. And he does multiple pictures of magnolia blossoms on different types of surfaces, different colors of cloth. This, we believe, is one of the best of his magnolia series. And he has excelled at his working his skill to such a degree that this picture truly kind of leaps out of the frame and seems as though it's sitting on a pedestal in front of you. It's so three-dimensional. It has this beautiful red velvet cloth upon which the flower sits, but the flower is opening to the world, and the shadows that go across the flower and across the little touches of light that go across the green leaves really bring it into drama and bring it to life. Now, the technique that he has developed is he has taken the red from the violet, the fabric, and he has actually outlined very, very lightly the leaves and the flower petals. It's very, very difficult to see on the flower petals, but if you look at the leaves, you will see a very faint outline of that same red. And that technique really pops the flower forward and makes it step away from the picture frame and into your own life. I personally believe that this picture is a very meditative picture. And I think if you spend time with it, you can really sink into this picture. You can almost begin to smell that very tropical fragrance that comes from a magnolia blossom. Remember, these blossoms only live for 2 weeks. So this picture is actually a comment on life, the glorious sweetness of a full everyday life, and yet the knowledge at the same time that life is fleeting. We need to enjoy it while we're living it if we can, because all too soon it will turn brown, as some of these leaves have, start to curl and slide away from us. So Mr. Heed, I believe, truly became known as one of the most important American artists, but he didn't really become known until after World War II. Now, his pictures are some of the few that can be discovered, believe it or not, in garage sales and flea markets, because during his tenure in Florida, he actually sold pictures to the general public, which was pretty much not heard of before. But an important picture, I think, to end our conversation about looking and connecting with art. This, I really believe, is one that is contemplative and meditative again, and it's one that you can lean into and spend time with. And I encourage you to do that either online through our app or through Facebook, or hopefully when the museum opens, in person. Thank you. Barbara?
Thank you, Jerry. As Jerry said, we have attempted to look at 5 pieces of art and hopefully connect a little bit more meditatively at each of them. This quote by Dr. Laura Jane Coley, I think really sums this up for us very well, that part of an artwork's meaning comes from the person's viewing it. So with that, I am going to turn it back to Allison, who will end it with any further comments or questions we might have.
Thank you so much. And we'll give a virtual round of applause for both Jerry and Barbara. Thank you so much for such a great tour. And I think I was so struck, by this kind of new idea of how we can connect with these artworks, especially the last 3 of those. They all kind of stuck out that the artist had really thought about the viewer, and in the sense that, I don't know, in the first one, I feel like we're part of that pastoral landscape, like maybe we're on a hill and we're looking down across the valley. The blind man's buff, we're all looking at them as they're looking at something else. And we can see those storm clouds roll in that they can't see yet. And then the last one, like Jerry said, the way that it pops out of the frame, kind of that 3D or 3-dimensionality of it, again, kind of makes it feel like you're connecting with it. So that was such a new perspective that I hadn't kind of thought of before. So thank you. We did have one question in the chat about the blind man's buff. Could the imminent storm be a predictor of social change in France? And I'm not sure, again, what year that's painted. But do you think that's sort of a social commentary that maybe that the artist thinks that the time of this kind of frivolity is coming to an end?
Well, going back to that piece, I believe that he was one that was very much aware of what was occurring in France, because during his time, the French Revolution occurred. So I'm sure that is correct. So when the French Revolution occurred and the patrons who bought his art were no longer there, he went back to Italy a second time and stayed there until the very end of his life, when his artwork was no longer as popular as it became, like many of the artists after his death. So perhaps the French Revolution was beginning. He saw that and he was thinking, what am I going to do? So that, I think that person who mentioned that had a very astute observation.
Yeah, so maybe more of his own sort of anxieties, maybe more so than the
yes, I never came across in the historian's research that was particularly true, but I did read about the French Revolution and how he reacted to it. So perhaps that does have a bearing on this particular painting.
Gotcha. Any other questions? Again, you can just go ahead and unmute yourself. I don't see any more in the chat, but you can either put them in the chat or just go ahead and ask right now.
Thanks, Jane, for your comment.
Hello, this is Becky, and I'm on my phone and I cannot find the chat part of but I just want to say that you both did an excellent job.
Thanks, Becky.
Really enjoyed it.
Thank you. All right, well, maybe if there's no questions, then we'll go ahead and wrap up. Yeah, we have a few more people saying thank you in the chat, and I echo those sentiments. Great job. We always appreciate having you. I know they always give tours on the 5th Thursday of every month, and a lot of Thursdays don't, or a lot of months don't have a 5th Thursday, so we love when we get to hear you too. So that'll do it. We just a couple of reminders before we go. These are weekly tours, so we have them every Thursday at 11 a.m. Same time, same place. So we hope that you can join us next week. We also wanted to let you know that we are happy to schedule private tours. So if you are maybe your office or your church group or book club, whatever it might be, would like to do a tour with us, our docents are ready and standing by to do so. These are free tours, and we can schedule those with you if you just reach out to us at the Timken Museum. I think you can email education@timkenmuseum.org, education@timkenmuseum.org. You can also go on our website. All the information is there. So yeah, with that, thank you again to both of our docents. Thank you all for joining us, and hope to see you next week at 11 a.m. on Thursday for another tour.
Thanks,
everybody. Thanks, Allison.
Thank you, everybody.